Welcome to Talks at Google. I'm very pleased and honoured to welcome Susie Dent to here in London. Susie is the resident word expert in Dictionary Corner on Channel 4's Countdown, and 8 out of 10 Cats does Countdown. She comments regularly on TV and radio on words in the news and has contributed to Women's Hour, 15 by 15, BBC Breakfast and Radio 4's Wordaholics. Susie is the author of several books and has a weekly column in both the Radio Times and on the website Mental Floss. Please join me in a massive round of applause for Susie Dent.
So comfortable there, I was tempted to sit down and watch myself, I have to say. This is great. It's funny because this book is all about eavesdropping, and normally I just tune in on people's conversations, but none of you were talking at all. You were all just looking at your screens, which is what I should expect from Google. So I haven't picked up any gems at all in the last 10 minutes, sadly. Although I guess you might have been on social media, in which case I can read them later, possibly. I say it's all about eavesdropping, and the word eavesdropper actually referred originally to people who would stand under the eaves drip or the eavesdrop of their house and surreptitiously listen in to their neighbours' conversations. And the eavesdrop was where the water quite literally would drop down from the guttering above them. But today, eavesdrops are absolutely everywhere. They're online, they are in every single possible space that you can imagine. And really, I've just become a professional collector, if you like, of those drips from the eaves. And my book is pretty much the result of what I've overheard and learned from the various tribes that I've visited or tuned in on. And apparently I've always been an eavesdropper, so right from when I was very little, my parents would always tell me to stop staring at people first of all, which you can sort of get away with when you're a toddler, but there comes a stage where you just can't stare anymore. In which case I would always try and strain my ear, and I'd pick up weird things like one of my mum's favourite expressions was, "Oh my giddy aunt." And I don't know if you've ever heard that. It's quite an old-fashioned thing, but I would always think, which aunt? Why was she so dizzy? So I remember really puzzling through that one. I remember my dad had a monkey wrench. Is it a monkey wrench or a monkey spanner? And I just thought, why the monkey? I remember really puzzling over that one and thought maybe you had to really lean and stretch or hang from a ladder in order to use it. So I've been doing this all my life, just picking little bits up and playing around with them and wondering quite where they came from. And I wrote them down, so I've gone through literally hundreds and hundreds of notebooks, and I'm actually moving house quite soon, and I've got a whole chest load of notebooks that I can't quite bring myself to chuck out, even though they're full of just silly little things like I think I mentioned in the introduction to the book, where does the word ruler come from? You know, the ruler that you mark lines with on your paper, and whether the Queen actually used one, and that was why it was called a ruler. And another one is famously in my family, why is pedestrian such a long word? Pedestrian, of course, being a pedestrian, and I still get that wrong. Pedestrians. But by speaking of tribes, the book is called Dent's Modern Tribes, and I'm speaking anthropologically, so I'm not really talking about genes or race and the kind of old sense of the word, and talking much more about the passions that people have, the professions that bind them together, the sort of hobbies they pursue, anything that will make a little or a big indeed community. And so football fans are in there, undertakers, paramedics, secret agents, Freemasons, all people who are somehow part of a community. And of course it's not just one, because each and every one of us are members of lots of different tribes. And of all the characteristics that unite us, probably the most significant, certainly for me, will be language. And tribe talk has been with us for centuries, and I remember discovering and just relishing the fact that 200 or 300 years ago, highwaymen in the dead of night, if they bumped into each other and they were on their way to rob, to pull up a jack, as they would call it, stopping a jack, if they bumped into somebody who they thought was a fellow highwayman, they would say, "The music's paid." The music's paid. That was their code to say, "I'm a fellow highwayman, don't stop me. I'm on my way to do my business." And I can't tell whether that was a sort of sinister swapping of code or whether it was actually just lively banter that you might find in the pub these days. But I always loved that, and to know that such tribal conversations go back a very, very long way. They talk about foisters, who were the pickpockets, and Derrick, D-E-R-R-I-C-K, and Derrick was the hangman, and the threat of the hangman was always looming over them. It goes back to Thomas Derrick, who was a notorious Elizabethan executioner. But those are the sort of codes that they swapped in those days, and in many ways, although we're not highwaymen anymore, we're still doing the same. And the first tribe I think I belonged to was the convent crowd. I went to a convent for my sins, literally, and we used to school confession. Is anyone a Catholic here, or anyone ever been to confession? We used to just get so bored with confession. Being in a convent, we had to do it every week, and you had to go, for anybody who doesn't know it, you sit behind a curtain. You're one side, the priest is on the other, and then you have to go through all the sins that you've committed that week. And of course, being 11 or 12, you've probably stolen a pencil, maybe. Not much worse than that, particularly in our convent. But we called it the spilling test. That was what we called confession. And I think, looking back, it was because it was behind the curtain that we spilled the beans. So this was our chance to sort of divulge anything. And I remember thinking we were so boring that actually we had to make up a few sins to try and get the priest more interested. But the severity of whatever we told him would dictate, of course, what penance prayers we then got. And so quite often we would be given an H3, and an H3 was if you were kind of middle of the table in terms of your sins, and that was a 3 Hail Mary penance. And then the full rosary we called the full Rosie Lee, and so it went on. And I'm pretty sure that the nuns themselves had their own codes as well about what terrible children we were, but they too would have had their own kind of tribal vocabulary. And since then, I have belonged to many, many other tribes. So when I worked in publishing, I would talk freely about dummies and dump bins and widows and orphans, all very, very sort of bleak vocabulary, bleeds, breaking spines. If you're in the publishing trade, you will know exactly what I'm talking about. If you're not, you will probably be very, very perplexed. They also, I've discovered from Ruby and George, my editor, have something called a carpet shuffle, which sounds about as tantalising as a cyclist's bonk, if you've ever bonked, if you're a cyclist. And carpet shuffles are sort of get-togethers to meet a new author. I had no idea about that one, but that one's gone in the book. I'm quite a keen sculler, so I go out sculling on the river. And so when I'm particularly clumsy or have done something really stupid in a project, which may be quite often, I will say I've caught a crab. If anybody is a rower, that's when you dig your oar really deep into the water and you practically capsize. I will myself say I've bonked if I'm really, really tired. And if you're with lexicographers, you might freely talk about egg corns. These are sort of tribal footprints that you might find each and every single one of us. Have you heard of egg corns? Oh, acorns is slightly slipped into the mainstream, but you can find whole websites dedicated to acorns, and they are slips of the tongue that actually make perfect sense, so you don't always notice them, and sometimes those slips actually become the standard after many, many years, sometimes even centuries. So you might get somebody asking you to cut to the cheese. Quite a few people apparently online, if you Google it, you might find quite a few hits of cut to the cheese. People think it's the last course of a meal, so let's just get to the end. Cut to the cheese might make sense. Putting, what else we got? Going at it hammer and thongs. Like a bowl, like a bowl in a china shop, which again sort of makes sense. Putting the cat before the horse. So many examples like this, and I've got so many favourites, but there are many of them out there. But lexicographers will call them acorns. That is our term. So if you ever hear dictionary makers talking about these, you will know that is our code. So those are just a few examples, I suppose, of my own tribal footprints, as I say, the sort of things that I might bandy about quite freely, that others might not understand, but in a way it doesn't really matter because it's my shorthand. But this book is all about me gathering information from other tribes, and it's not just about eavesdropping, because there's only a certain amount, I suppose, that you can pick up when you eavesdrop. It also means, as I say in the book, it means almost facing a different way. And there's a fantastic book called The Racing Tribe, which Kate Fox, if any of you have read it, wrote. Really, really interesting. And it's a sort of anthropological study, if you like, of the people who go racing, the punters, the jockeys, the crowds, and the bookies, etc. And she writes really brilliantly, I think, of going to the Epsom Derby, and she doesn't see the winner romp home because for the whole time that the race is going on, she's standing with her back to the race and she's just watching the crowd. And in some ways, if you really want to pick up people's jargon, that's what you need to do. You need to kind of stand still and you almost need to turn a different way. It's like, as I say in the book, standing still in a sea of commuters, because you have to drown out all the white noise in order to tune in. And so, in many ways, this book is not really just about words that are lost in translation, but sometimes they've just been lost altogether. And it's partly because we're not tuning in to these conversations. They don't mean anything to us. We don't need to know what these words are. And besides, we're too busy really lobbing our words, our own tribal talk, over the heads of other people in order to sort of pick up on other people's. So if you were to hear a Twitcher, for example, celebrate finally unblocking the blocker, you might think, oh, that sounds quite interesting, but then you'll move on because you're too busy talking to somebody else. And you really shouldn't, in my book, because you then miss out just a little bit about what makes a birder or a twitcher tick. And incidentally, actually, amongst birders, if you spot something on your list that you should have seen ages ago, because it's quite a common sighting, you call it a tart tick. But you do pick up these little things, and as I say, you gain just one more insight into the community that is sharing this tribal language. Twitchers are a great one, actually. Probably my favourite from those was the LBJ, the little brown job, which is the one bird that during molting season nobody can identify, and so they just put LBJ because it's a little brown thing that's wandering around. There were many surprises really in writing this book too, because twitchers, I suppose, I would expect a sort of niche vocabulary, probably not quite as aggressive as some of these twitchers seem to be. Apparently British bird watchers are the most passionate but also the most feisty in the entire bird watching world. But they weren't really a surprise. Builders were a surprise to me, because I approached quite a lot of tribes thinking all the stereotypes must be wrong, surely not all surely not all builders whistle at women, surely, you know, they've kind of moved on from there. But actually, as one fantastic builder said to me, I'll just read out his wonderful quote if I can find it. I don't know if I've got it here, but he just said, it's our get out of jail free card, really. He said, we realised that for generations and generations, if you've got a spanner, you've got a tape measure hanging off you, you somehow feel you've got every right to be the wanker on the roof, as he put it. And you know, you may be married, you may have 2 kids, the person you're looking at or whistling at may be so far away that they're just a speck in the distance, but somehow you're a builder, so you can actually send out a wolf whistle. And the person told me this is very happily married and not at all sexist, but that was quite a sort of strange insight for me. Builders also had the most fantastic vocabulary. So Gary Neville, for example, if you're a football fan, gets a frequent look in, because that's a slang term for a spirit level, which they also call a bubble. A snotter, which I think we could do with in daily life, but a snotter is anything, if you're into home decorating, it's anything that's stuck in the paint that shouldn't be. That was, you've just painted an entire wall, and in my case painted over a fly, which I did do once. It's anything that just shouldn't be there. They also, possibly one of my favourite phrases in the book, they also provided that, which is spreading the fat, which is plastering. But on Lionel Richie's dance floor, and they'll just say, I'm spreading the fat on Lionel Richie, meaning I'm painting the ceiling. So that's Lionel Richie dancing on the ceiling, etc., etc. So you have to sort of make that connection to get there. But they freely swap this kind of banter around, and it's a real sort of community lexicon for them, which I love. Train spotters were fun too. I'm guessing if you work at Google, you're probably not a train spotter. Anybody? No, although the demographic is changing a little bit. I've been telling Ruby a lot that I was travelling on a train the other day up to London, and there were 2 incredibly hip guys sitting opposite me, looked absolutely like they would work here or on their way to a digital media conference, or they were sort of hipsters, as they say, lumbersexuals, as you might say. So they had kind of great lumberjack shirts on, and I just thought, yeah, okay, they're too hip for their own good, really, not that you guys are. And really didn't mean that. And then I started tuning in, as I always do, and they started talking about flying up in a car. So I started thinking, they're going to some film conference, this is Chitty Chitty Bang Bang or something. And then they started talking about a fiasco with a faulty peg, which sent me off in a completely new direction altogether. Anyway, I finally, when they started talking about the HS1 Javelin, realised they were actually train spotters, and they were the most unlikely train spotters you're ever likely to meet. But this was the new kind of train spotters. Apparently even women now are admitted into the train spotting fold. And so I just got a little glimpse into their lives, I suppose, as well as their vocabulary, and I was really gutted because I hadn't got half of what they said in the book. So I thought, okay, that's definitely for the reprint. But I think that's going to be my fate with this book, is even since it's gone to press, I've probably got about a dozen or more words that I should have put in that I've picked up that I haven't. But every tribal conversation almost provides something new. So I reckon, by the way, when it comes to train spotters, I'm a BERT. That was my other favourite term, which is your average traveller. That's intent only on getting to from A to B. And if you're a normal, you are a complete non-enthusiast. I'm probably that too. So that was train spotters, but there weren't that many surprises when it came to other tribes, really. So I did expect to find a devoted, history-steeped lexicon amongst cabbies, for example. Because take London's black cabbies, you know about their history, over a century old. You know about the knowledge, the appearances, the pink book, etc. The blue book, sorry, which is actually pink. And so I did get that when I probed into it, and that was, in a way, quite reassuring, because I was worried that some tribal lexicons might just be dying out, but not then. They talk about a life on the hickory, that's the dickory dock, which is the meter, and they talk about all sorts of different kinds of punters. So if you get cabbies together, including female cabbies, I had some great rides with some female cabbies who were, I think there's only about 30 or 40 sort of active in the capital all day. There are a lot of sort of part-time female cabbies, but not many who have dared to enter what is still an incredibly predominantly male industry. But anyway, going back to their punters, they talk about cock and hen, that is a male and female passenger. A single pin is a lone passenger. A golden roader is the dream ticket. That's somebody who's going on a long distance, and obviously lots of money for them. But the ultimate goal for the passenger at least, is a sherbet, and that's a cab, sherbet dab, that takes them on the cotton. And if they're on the cotton, that is the shortest possible distance between two routes. And cabbie to cabbie, they talk about lots of different landmarks in London, which were lovely, I thought. The gasworks, so the Houses of Parliament. The scent box was the rank at King's Cross, I think because it's rank, it's anything but well scented. The broadcasting house is the tripe shop, which I loved. And all these are kind of swapped as readily, really, as tales of the evil bilker, and a bilker is a passenger who runs off without paying at all. So I expected to find that there. I also expected to find, within the banter of football, a really unique lexicon, and there too I really wasn't disappointed. You've got footballers, you've got the managers, you've got punters, and possibly one of the highlights of the book, if I got any Arsenal fans here, was I didn't actually meet him, but I had an email exchange with Arsene Wenger about the post-match interview, and my big question to him was, why, when managers are interviewed after a football game, why are they so boring? Why does everything they say sound completely cliched and predictable? And he said, it's true. It's totally true. Why do they want to speak to us? I don't know. But he said, you will never get anything unique from a football manager, because we have to be incredibly guarded. We have to keep our cards close to our chest. And so we will never say anything new at all. I think maybe the one exception I would make to that is Gordon Strachan. Again, I don't know how much you know about football, but he was a genius when it came to kind of riposte to interviewers. And I remember he was famously chased by a reporter that kept saying, Gordon, can we have a quick word? And he just replied, given that it was a quick word, he just replied, velocity, and walked off, which I thought was genius, absolutely genius. But for the most part, Arsene is right. I like swapping his name around as if I actually know him. Arsene Wenger was right. There is nothing new to be gained in the post-match interview. But amongst the fans and the commentators, It's definitely a unique kind of language, and you don't really get it anywhere else. So quality, class, the adjectives of choice. Adverbs are completely done away with, famously the boy done good, but lots and lots of examples there as well. Your knows are sprinkled around liberally, and like I say, has more caps probably than Stephen Gerrard, even when what they're referring to has never been said in the first place, which I always find quite interesting. And of course, all in all, you couldn't make it up, which was another famous one. But in all of these cases, and in those many other chapters in the book really, cabin crew, paramedics, truckers, who talk freely about sick horses and willy weavers. You have to look in the book to see what those are. Tribal conversations like these are a way of uniting its members, and I know you will have your own vocabulary here too. It's a sort of closed shop, if you like, but it's not particularly designed to keep outsiders out. It's more an identifier for you. This is our club, this is our language, and it unites us as members, and very often you will be completely unconscious that you're using it. At other times it's a very expedient shorthand, so you might swap acronyms around like nobody's business, but it will mean absolutely everything to the people that you are talking to. And there are other groups who also have this kind of banter, but there's another motive at play here as well, and that of course is secrecy. So that includes the Freemasons. Don't know, I'm guessing, well actually you probably couldn't tell me if you were a Mason if you were here, but it would only be the men that I'm looking at anyway. But if you're a member of a Masonic lodge, you probably do want to keep quite a lot of what you do secret. Its language is fascinating. It's kind of steeped in the Bible and archaic language, so really, really resonant, but very, very old language that goes back to Anglo-Saxon, most of it. But it was fascinating to get a little bit of a glimpse into the world of the Freemasons, because they're trying to make an active effort to come out and promote themselves as great charity workers. They do actually do a lot for charity, and they contribute a lot to various causes. So they want to kind of come and present themselves. You'll find videos on YouTube telling you exactly how to be a Freemason if you want to be, why you might want to be a Freemason. And yet they have these initiation rites, they have these handshakes, apparently there's more than one, that they don't want anyone to know about. And yes, they do involve a trouser leg being pulled up, but not for long, apparently. And if you've heard the rumour about a noose around a neck in these initiation rites, that does happen too. But apparently it's supposed to represent the umbilical cord and nothing more sinister. But these initiation rites, which I wasn't allowed to see, sadly, because women, there are female-only Masonic lodges, but you can't really become a member of the main ones. They're like little playlets, which are completely tailored to the Mason to be, and they sort of all, I suppose they just all revolve around that person's life. Some of them are little comedies, little sketches. I spoke to Rick Wakeman, if you know who he is. He's a musician and now a member of the Chelsea Lodge, and he just said they are absolutely fantastic to witness. They are literally like little stage plays, but no one else will ever know about them. But just getting a little glimpse into their language told me really that they embrace the secrecy of their world, whilst at the same time wanting to open themselves up a little bit to the world. So there was a strange tension there. But they are a good example of a tribe where actually secrecy is everything. And of course there are many more. There's the military, where operational codes are all important. Talk to people in the RAF, soldiers. But strangely, even amongst them, the best tribal language, the best jargon, if you like, the most colourful, was all about life on the ground, not when they're actually facing the enemy, when in fact banter gets thrown out of the window. It's all code, and it's not particularly entertaining code for the outside, although it's obviously all important. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. It's obviously all important to them. But on the ground, I know George over there in Ruby, that one of their favourite terms is a jack brew, which we all now regularly use at home. And a jack brew is when somebody's made a cup of tea for themselves, but not for other people. So they come back and that is what they call it. So these sort of groups, if you like, as I say, operate in in two different ways. They know they have a code, they know that code is all important, and yet at the same time they're trying to present a face to the public that is open and inviting, and trying to sort of get away from all the, well, in the case of the Freemasons, the conspiracy theories thrown at them, in the case of the military, in the face of quite frequent criticism and controversy. But many of these particular secret languages, if you like, straddle both worlds as well. So they don't just have that tension, but they're actually operating on two levels. So you might overhear a policewoman, excuse me, talking about an obbo on a twocker, which is an observation on a carjacker, basically, somebody who's taken without consent. That's where twocker comes from. So she's kind of talking about that, which is all work related, but her partner in fighting crime might lament the quality of the job role in the nick, and the job role is the loo paper, basically, which is notoriously as rough as the criminals that they've just banged up in the nick. It's quite interesting talking to police because they absolutely reject everything that you might hear on the TV cop shows, which of course is probably the only forum that we have for picking up all this criminal slang. Instead, they talk very, very differently, and yet they're absolutely glued to these police dramas as well. So very much that's their kind of topic of conversation every day, is did they see the last bill? Is the bill still going? I don't know. But they love all these cop dramas and then absolutely taking them apart. Another really fun one, which again operates really fun tribe, which operates with really essential, vital, literally life-saving code, and that kind of banter, is doctors and paramedics. Now, their funny acronyms are notorious, and there are whole websites dedicated to the weird acronyms that you will find in medicine. And so I thought, no way am I going to find these, because they're so apocryphal. They must be apocryphal. They've been around for so long that surely you would never find one of these in patients' notes. And some of them do slip into patients' notes, but for the most part they are reserved for the banter amongst junior medics and junior doctors. But you do still find them. In fact, you find them in far more places than you expect to, and sometimes it's quite frightening. Some of them are quite sweet. So a VIP is a very intoxicated person in A&E, which you will find a lot. There's one on the internet which I really didn't think I'd ever find, because I just thought it sounded like it had been made up by a comedian, but I did then hear it used by a doctor, and that's teeth, which means tried everything else, try homeopathy. They frequently complain about Dr. Google, the GPs, in their waiting room, because we are all, as they call, hypo-Google-chondriacs, like that. In other words, we look up on Google we look our symptoms up, and then we decide that we actually have a terminal illness. In my case, that happens quite regularly. And GPs are well used to this. They call them their frequent flyers. If you do actually get ill and end up in hospital, the one thing not to celebrate is the doctor ordering some house red, because that actually means a blood transfusion, and you need that quite quickly. Meanwhile, as for paramedics, I found the most fantastic paramedic called Luke, who worked with a fast response unit in London. And he sort of let me into the world of the paramedics. He said nobody quite knows why they became one, they just do. But actually, if you listen to his tales of what really makes a paramedic's day, well, there were two things. One is to successfully get a cannula into a vein without any sort of fuss. If you've ever had that, it is quite painful, and it can take a very long time if they can't find the vein. And if they get it spot on, that's a highlight of their day. But the other very sweet one that he told me was just that day he had gone to an elderly patient. He'd spent half a day with her because she'd fallen over. He picked her up, he gave her a cup of tea, he made sure that she was all right. He thought to himself, that's why I became a paramedic. But inevitably they have to see far, far worse. And so they rely on this incredibly black humour, I mean really black humour. They don't call it sick jokes, or call them sick jokes for nothing. I was really staggered by the sort of banter that you will find amongst the paramedics crew. They discuss, for example, the level of death of a patient. So a patient isn't just dead, they are either dead or proper dead or dead. And all that reflects really the level to which they're kind of so far gone that they can't possibly be resuscitated. So I thought it would be far more complex than that. I thought they would have a very technical shorthand, but no, it was all about the levels of dead. And then they had pluses and minuses as well to accompany those. So it was quite sobering, really, going out with them. But on the other hand, you can see the kind of humour that they deliver, the banter that they deliver to patients as well, who they're desperately trying to reassure, who may be in a real predicament. The jokes that they tell are really bad and not at all funny, but I guess if you're in pain, then they might actually do something. But I think if there's anything I would say about tribal conversation, it's that it will just give you so much insight into the people that use it. And after this, I would love to hear a bit about the sort of jargon that you swap amongst yourselves, although I'm betting that you're probably giving the same answer as every single other tribe in this book, including lexicographers, which is when you say, what code do you use at work? You will say, we don't have one. And that everybody said that to me, because you're not actually aware half the time that you're using it. And as I always say, the best time to pick up tribal conversation is when it's not looking, which is where you come back to eavesdropping, where you come back to actually listening to people talk to each other, and you say, well, hang on, what's that? One of the examples that Ruby and I have encountered in the last few days is visiting bookshops. And if I don't know if any of you have written a book here or if you're aware of publishing terminology, but if you're an author, one of the things you really want to get is a dump bin. So if you're told that your book is in the dump bin, if you're an outsider, you'd think, that's terrible, I'm in the remainder pile. But the dump bin is actually really where you want to be. It's a kind of point of sale, be like that in the middle, a stand possibly with lots of your books prominently on display as you walk into a bookshop. That is a dump bin. But in Foyles, they call it something completely different. A NIND, I think it was. And a NIND is simply named after an employee there, but it goes back, it seemed like decades, to somebody who used to use it. And that's just an example. They were just throwing it around, but you have to actually stop them and say, you know, what is that? And then can I write it down? So I'd love to hear afterwards if you can think of anything that you use amongst yourselves, if you can think of it. But as I say, it may be that I would have to pick it up elsewhere. Although if you don't talk when you're on your computers, that might be quite hard. The other thing, I think I mentioned builders there. But the kind of slang that the builders use does again go back centuries, and sometimes the technology has long superseded the sort of jargon they use. But there's sort of little pockets of Britain where you will find really, really old-fashioned vocabulary still being used. And one of those tribes is traditional butchers' shops. And of course, with the whole artisan movement, there are a lot more traditional butchers, especially because we ended up with horse meat all over our plates quite recently. I think they've seen something of a resurgence. But they were one of the most fascinating tribes in the book because they use a back slang that's appropriately called pig Latin. And then if you know about back slang, probably our most obvious example of back slang is the word yob, which is simply boy backwards. And so the idea is that a yob is a sort of slightly backwards or slightly criminal, I suppose, boy. But in butchers, they use this back slang very often, and there are quite a few butchers in London actually that still use it. But you may not hear it, or you may not pick it up because it's not directed at you. It's always about the customer more often than not. So they might talk about yenon, which is money, or they might talk about hellbat, which is a table. This is like a giant game of countdown, by the way, because it's not just backwards, but they throw in extra consonants and all sorts of things, and you have to unscramble them. But if they want to complain about a customer, they'll just say things like tish, which is their euphemism for shit. In other words, if they see a really annoying one come in, they'll go tish, like that. And cool the dello namo, not said like that obviously, but means look at the old woman. And she doesn't have to be old, it's just code for a really irritating customer. So if you hear that one, beware. But customers are a recurrent theme throughout the book. And of course, if you think about it, that's when code is really necessary, when these people want to complain about the people who are both the be-all and the bane, if you like, of their existence. So waiters, might talk about being stiffed by a flea, which means that they have just not been tipped by a really annoying customer or been given a really, really poor tip, which makes sense. if they have a camper, so that's one who sits in a cafe just endlessly nursing a single cappuccino for 3 hours, they will talk about the various codes that they use to kind of either to get them out, or if they're caught in a conversation with them, for somebody else to come along and sort of, take them out of the conversation in a polite sort of way. So I don't know if anybody's seen Glengarry Glen Ross, that film. There's just a little code in there which is Kenilworth, and Kenilworth is the code for right, it's time for action. So in one restaurant that I went to, Kenilworth was the code for you're wanted. In other words, get out of that conversation because this is just a camper. There were many other similar experiences like that. However, if you're in your local Costa and a particularly hot customer comes in, she might be called a fresh pot. So make me a fresh pot means someone's really hot's just walked in. And for that they might prepare a special Al Pacino, as they call it. Actually, baristas were really fascinating, but very, very hard to crack. And just looking at, I've forgotten his name now, Ben Schott, if you know the author, he wrote lots of different Schott's Miscellany, etc., has put together a fantastic list of American barista speak. If you ever get a chance to read it, I think it was in the New York Times, it's very, very funny. But over here, it was actually really hard to get baristas to let me in on their codes for customers. Other recurring themes, I don't know here at Google, do you have any kind of, not really initiation rites for new recruits, but do you have any jokes that you might play on somebody, like asking them to do something which is an impossible task?
We have noogler hats. So they're hats with little windmills on the top as well. So that's and people who are new to Google are called nooglers. So that would be.
Oh, that's a good one. How do you spell that then?
It's Googler with an N at the beginning. Yeah, noogler.
Yeah, that's so obvious. Oh, I should have known that one being a wordsmith. And so they wear that for how long?
As little as, well, some people wear it for a while. Some people embrace it. I would say it tends to be more in the American offices that happens. I think we're a little more British and cynical in general.
Yeah, or self-conscious, probably. Well, this is one of the things that I discovered is most professions I spoke to had some sort of weird initiation rites for new recruits. So if you're a builder, you're told to go and get a sky hook or a glass hammer. Or a long wait, and sound technicians as well had the long wait, and basically that means that you go into a shop and ask for a long wait and they will give you one by leaving you standing there for hours, and that happens quite a lot. Going back to sound technicians, actually, just as an aside, their vocabulary was astonishingly rude, and in the Countdown studio the sound technicians are the ones that move around completely unobtrusively and silently. You talk to them when they put your mic on, but you don't actually, they're just very quiet and they're very, very efficient, and yet when you ask them about their language it's like you've walked into Anne Summers. They talk about donkeys, dongers, this is all their equipment, donkeys, dongers, butt plugs, you can edit this bit out if you like, and all plugs are either male or female depending on when they've got a prong or a hole. I mean, honestly, it was quite astonishing that these people were just so quite as rude as they were. But roadies were exactly the same. This is kind of the sort of humour the bawdy humour that they delight in. Likewise, classical musicians, we have the BBC Symphony and extras in the Countdown studio, and they are really aggressive towards each other. So quite a few well-known rivalries between particular players of particular instruments. No one likes the conductor either, and they can be quite playful as well. So if they're fed up and think it's time for a tea break, the flute will just start imitating a kettle, which I think is quite clever. Anyway, I'm digressing. But yeah, going back, I think in submariners, you're asked for a bulkhead remover. That's what when the bulkhead is actually a wall. So all these are kind of the initiation rites that you might get within certain industries. I don't think we had any in the telly industry, although famously one of the things that made me think this would be a good book to write was me. Actually, I get this quite often now, but when it first happened I was really delighted because our director told me that I was looking really hot on the floor. which to an outsider might mean something entirely different. And actually to me, I just thought, oh, that's nice. But actually that meant I was looking really shiny on the studio floor, and I needed powder. So whenever someone says to me, now you look hot, I just always think, well, thanks. It's time for makeup. But there are occasions, maybe that's one of them actually, when decoding isn't necessarily a good thing, and it would have been quite nice to go on thinking that I was looking hot rather than just incredibly shiny and not very good. I think if you were to hear, for example, a camera operator, I've never heard this, but apparently this happens on Coronation Street, that if a cameraman is doing a completely low shot and needs a knee pad, because they're going to be there for a long time, they ask for a Lewinsky. So sometimes it is best not to ask, I would say. There are lots of examples like this. It's not all obscene or blue, I promise you. But anyway, I realised that I've just sort of hopped from tribe to tribe, but I just wanted to give you a smattering really of the sort of people that I covered and why I did it, because just these secret conversations I find absolutely intriguing, and they don't need to be secret. In fact, I would say 80% of these are simply the in-group banter that binds us together. We all have it, we're all parts of so many different tribes, but this language just goes over our heads, and we might raise an eyebrow at some of the stuff that we hear sometimes, but we don't really take it home and examine it. And Rachel Riley, who I work with on Countdown, finds it hysterical that I sometimes talk about etymologists being word detectives, and she once gave me a printed card with me and a Sherlock Holmes deer stalker with Susie Dent word detective underneath it. But that is really what you have to be, and at the back of the book I have put a little guide to how to be an eavesdropper if you want to be one, and that's not to try and pick up salacious gossip of any kind, but just to listen into the conversations, and I promise you it will be rewarding. And this might be the first occasion today that I didn't actually pick anything up from you guys. But I would really encourage you both to keep talking, obviously, but you can do that online. But just to listen out to the sort of things that you're swapping. Maybe think about why you started using them in the first place, and just learn a little bit about your tribe in the process. Because eavesdropping is a really good thing to do if you do it in the right way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll have time for a couple of questions. If you could open perhaps with a word as well that you think we use internally, I'll give you one.
Oh, I'd love one.
I know we use trixes to mean spreadsheets. So trix, T-R-X.
Okay, but you call them tricks.
We call them trixes.
Okay.
I'm not sure why. Does anyone know?
That was the name that the team that developed it gave it. That was the code.
That was the internal code word for the Google Sheets product.
Have you got a pen with you? I'm just going to write these down.
Anyone have a question they would like to ask? Otherwise, I will open with, have you ever used your knowledge of a tribe to kind of blag your way in, to kind of infiltrate, or appear to be a member of that tribe, even though you weren't?
That's such a good question. It reminds me of one that Jimmy Carr asked me, which was, do you ever use your knowledge of language to insult people without them knowing it? Which the answer to which is yes, I do. But have I ever tried to blag my way? I think we all have. I think I do quite well in an Undertaker's. Okay. Because they were very cheery, surprisingly. They, again, had very black humour. All corpses are customers. Have I mentioned corpsicles? I know I have at one point today. Corpsicles are corpses that are cryogenically frozen. They talk about throat slashes, belly punches. That's a different kind of cavity embalming. Yeah, there's a bit of rivalry going on with Undertakers as well. I think I do quite well then, because I got quite into this is very sad, but I got quite into the language of embalming. So I possibly could do that, and I wear a lot of black. But I don't know if I've actively tried to kind of, I think, do you know what, I probably have, but I haven't been conscious of doing it. Okay. Yeah, comedians probably as well, actually.
Any questions? Yes, I want to ask you.
Have you seen, how do things kind of generally evolve from being banter amongst a group of friends into something that's kind of like across a whole wide demographic? So from a group of cabbies to all cabbies use these terms? Yeah,
that's a really good question. I think within a tribe, it's just a question of word of mouth, literally. And I think it's like teenagers, how does that get about? Or with teenagers, it's mostly online, social media, etc. But things can spread incredibly quickly. And nowadays, a word takes literally seconds to kind of travel thousands of miles, you know, if you compare that to even 100 years ago. I think when it slips into the mainstream is quite interesting as well, because we were talking today about pilots. At one point, it was obviously incredibly seen as being incredibly cool and glamorous to use aviation vocabulary, possibly after the Second World War. So we talk about flying by the seat of our pants, we talk about pushing the envelope, you know, lots and lots of different words come from aviation. So it's just, most of this stuff is oral. It's transmitted orally rather than in print, so it's actually quite difficult to pinpoint where something started and how it ended up where it did. But with cabbies, you know, they all get together at ranks and they speak in this, you know, amazing jargon. They talk about having a Churchill together, which is having a meal, because way back Winston Churchill decreed that cabbies must have an hour, you know, free of passengers, in which they could enjoy, this is black cabbies, in which they could enjoy their meal. So they all get together, and this is their banter, and it's passed on that way. But I find it really interesting how, you know, which ones we think cool at given times, and then which ones get out there. So maybe noogles or nooglers.
Nooglers. People who work at Google are Googlers.
Yeah.
And I think
I do get that now.
Left Google are Zooglers, and with an X at the beginning, so there's all sorts of...
Okay, I'm writing all this down.
How long does it perhaps take, so similar question, how long does it take for someone to be a member of a tribe? Do you pick up all that language? Have you studied how long that might take? 3 months, 6 months, a year? I
think it depends. If you were to go out on the river tomorrow as a sculler, you'd pick it up like that, because that's just, you know, you have to know that in order to you know what the equipment is, etc. If you are a poker player, likewise, I think if you really wanted to succeed at poker, you'd have to know your moves and you'd have to know your vocab very, very quickly. With others, it probably takes years and years and years. And the wonderful thing is that each tribe will have different pockets as well. So, you know, there'll be a completely different builder slang probably in Manchester to the one down here.
Certainly, I don't understand what the engineers here are saying most of the time. They have their own vocab as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any more questions? Yes.
You spoke about the colour that comes from banter and, you know, how different tribes use it. Have you seen any pressure from sort of political correct trends that is pushing that banter underground, or just, you know, causing people concern with, you know, you mentioned the Lewinsky one, and you sort of, some people would...
Yeah, it's awful, I agree. Yeah, and yet it's still used, and actually it's used by some of the most PC people, including a couple of people on the Countdown crew who are, I haven't heard it used by a woman actually, understandably, but a couple of blokes in their 30s who are as nice guys as you could possibly find, but that's what they picked up. They don't question it. It's a really good question about whether or not it's kind of being sent underground. I think there are some tribes which guard their jargon so carefully, because if it did get outside, it would be horrendous. Paramedics probably being one of them, and the police being another. So I'm not just talking about the operational stuff that should never get outside, but it could be taken completely the wrong way if some of the police stuff did get out. And yet for them, as I say, it's their kind of release valve. So no, I didn't, but I suspect as generations evolve, I mean, okay, you might have a 30-year-old saying Lewinsky, but I would be quite surprised if in, you know, 2 decades time that one's still around, but maybe it will have been replaced by something else. There's definitely, not just in football where you probably would expect it, there's a definite maleness about a lot of tribal banter actually, and that was one of the things I was talking about earlier. Hopefully my next book is going to be about the language of sort of different, you know, men's language versus women's language, and all the stereotypes that we make about each of them, how women just never stop talking, or you know, how they sort of rise in pitch whenever they get stressed, and how that differs from men, and whether that's really true, and how women say very often sorry, or I wonder if, or, you know, put all the qualifiers in front of their sentences, which is absolute classic. I do it myself. Or could I just, whereas you don't usually get men saying that. So that's what I'm going to be doing next. But I think that's a really good question. I don't know. I didn't actually see too much of PC political correctness stamping stuff out, but I did see just how closely guarded it was, because they were aware of how damaging it could be.
With that, please join me in a massive round of applause for Susie Dent.